The night my water broke, I was alone in a parking lot outside a Shoppers Drug Mart in Mississauga, and the first person I called wasn't my husband. It wasn't my mother. It was 911, because I already knew, even then, even through the pain, that the people who were supposed to show up for me wouldn't. That sounds dramatic. I know how it sounds. But by the time I was 31 weeks pregnant and driving myself to a prenatal appointment in the middle of February, I had already learned not to expect much from the people I loved most. Let me back up. My name is Simone. Well, that's what my coworkers call me. But this isn't a story about work. This is a story about my family, and about the night everything I thought I knew about them turned out to be a lie dressed up in Sunday clothes. I grew up in Brampton, the second of 3 daughters. My older sister was the responsible one. My younger sister was the favorite. Not in a mean way, just in the quiet way that youngest children often are, where the parents have gotten tired of fighting and just let things slide. And then there was me, stuck in the middle, always the one trying to hold everything together without anyone asking me to. My mother is a proud woman. Church every Sunday, casseroles for sick neighbors, the kind of woman who keeps the house spotless even when everything inside it is falling apart. My father worked in logistics for most of his life. Long hours, not much warmth, but he showed up, paid the bills, kept things stable. That's how we measured love in our house. Showing up, paying bills, keeping things stable. I thought I'd built something different with my husband. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party downtown. He was smart, funny, the kind of man who remembered small details. He asked me once on our 3rd date what I'd been like as a child, not what I did but what I was like. Nobody had ever asked me that before. I think that was the moment I fell in love with him. We got married in the summer, a small ceremony at a venue in Oakville, nothing extravagant. I was 31. He was 34. We started trying for a baby almost immediately because I knew, in the way women know things, that time was not something I had in surplus. The pregnancy was hard from the start. I had hyperemesis, the severe kind, not just morning sickness, but the kind where you lose weight in the first trimester and end up on IV fluids. My husband was supportive for the first few weeks, and then he got busy. His company was in the middle of a merger. There were late nights. There were weekend trips to Toronto that turned into Tuesday business dinners, that turned into him sleeping on the couch because he didn't want to wake me. I told myself it was stress. I told myself all marriages went through this. I called my mother once, during a particularly bad week, and she told me to make sure I was keeping the house tidy, because men don't like coming home to disorder. I didn't call her again about it after that. My older sister was more sympathetic on the surface. She'd check in with texts, little heart emojis, the occasional thinking of you. But she and her husband had just bought a new house in Burlington, and she was consumed by renos and mortgage conversations and the particular exhaustion of trying to appear effortlessly put together at all times. My younger sister had moved to Vancouver 2 years prior for a job she loved. She sent me a baby gift, a beautiful one, and a voice note saying she wished she could be there. So I was doing it mostly alone, and I had gotten okay with that. Not happy with it, but okay. Then at 38 weeks I was in a car accident. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't distracted. I was on a perfectly ordinary street, 2 kilometers from home, when a pickup truck ran a red light and hit the driver's side of my car so hard that I don't actually remember the impact itself. Only the sudden wrongness of it, the airbag, the silence afterward, and then someone knocking on my window asking if I was okay. I was not okay. I had a fractured wrist, 2 bruised ribs, and I was in labor. They took me to Credit Valley. My daughter was born 4 hours after the accident, small, furious, and perfect. They placed her on my chest for 30 seconds before she had to go to the NICU, because her breathing was irregular. I watched them carry her away, and I remember thinking, very clearly, that I would do anything to keep her safe. Absolutely anything. My husband arrived at the hospital around midnight. He'd been in a meeting, an actual meeting, he said, with clients from out of province, and his phone had been on silent. He walked in smelling faintly of wine and looked at me in the hospital bed, my wrist wrapped, my face banged up from the airbag, and said, "God, you look terrible." I don't think he meant it the way it sounded, but I didn't forget it either. My parents arrived the next morning. My mother came in carrying a Tim Hortons bag, set it on the table without offering me any, and sat down in the chair by the window. My father stood near the door the way he always does in uncomfortable situations, like he's calculating the fastest route to an exit. I told them about the NICU. I told them the doctors thought our daughter would be fine, but needed monitoring for at least a week, maybe 2. I told them I couldn't drive with my wrist, couldn't carry anything heavy with my ribs, and that I was going to need help. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at the window. We talked about this, my mother said. On the way over. I waited. Your father's back has been bothering him since Christmas, she continued. And I've just taken on a new commitment at the church, the Thursday evening program. And the Sunday school rota is understaffed as it is. She paused. We don't think we can have you stay with us. It wouldn't be fair to you, honestly. The house isn't set up for a baby. I sat with that for a moment. Their house had 4 bedrooms. My old bedroom still had my childhood bed in it. My mother had just repainted the guest room in April. Just for a couple of weeks, I said. While my wrist heals, I can't look after her on my own right now. Your husband will be there, my father said, the first words he'd spoken since they arrived. He travels for work, I said. He's already told me he has a conference in Calgary next week. Another look between them. My mother reached into the Tim Hortons bag and took out a tea. We really think, she said carefully, that this is something you and your husband need to manage together. We raised our children. It's not our place to step back in now. I asked her, very quietly, what she thought would happen to a woman with a fractured wrist and 2 bruised ribs who was trying to care for a premature newborn alone. She told me I was always so dramatic, that she'd managed worse. That her own mother had given birth to 6 children with no help at all, and had never once complained. They left an hour later. My mother patted my foot through the blanket on her way out. My father said, chin up, in the hallway. I lay there for a long time after that. The fluorescent light in the room made a faint buzzing sound that I've never forgotten. I could hear nurses talking in the hallway, a cart rolling past, a baby crying somewhere down the corridor. And I kept thinking, is that her? Is that my daughter? My husband texted around 2 in the afternoon to say he was tied up but would come by in the evening. He did come. He stayed for about 40 minutes. He asked about the discharge plan, scrolled his phone while the nurse was explaining the NICU protocol to us, and then said he had to get home because he had an early call with Calgary. After he left, I cried. Not dramatically, just steadily, quietly, the way you cry when there's no one there to see it and no point in performing anything for anybody. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke to a knock at the door. A soft knock 3 times, the kind of knock that's trying not to disturb you. My grandfather stepped into the room. He's 81 years old. He drives a 13-year-old Buick that he refuses to get rid of, because it still runs fine. He had on his good coat, the wool one he keeps for church and hospital visits and funerals, and he was holding a paper bag from the bakery on Queen Street that he's been going to since before I was born. He looked at me. He looked around the room, the empty chair, the uneaten food on the tray, the fact that I was alone at 9 o'clock in the evening after being in a car accident and giving birth. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just set the bag down on the table, came over, and took my good hand in both of his. Your cousin called me, he said. Told me what happened. I hadn't called my cousin. Someone else had. I don't know who. But my grandfather had driven 45 minutes through February traffic to be there, alone, in his good coat at 9 o'clock at night. I didn't even try to hold it together. I just cried. And he sat with me and let me cry. And when I was done, he opened the paper bag and there were 2 butter tarts and a piece of carrot cake, and he said, you should eat something. So I ate. He stayed until visiting hours ended. He asked me to tell him everything, and I did. The accident, the NICU, my parents that morning, that afternoon. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He just listened with the kind of attention that makes you feel like what you're saying matters, like you matter. When I was done, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said, I want you to come to my place when they discharge you. You and the baby both. Grandpa? I have the room, he said. And I have the time. And frankly, he added, I'm a better cook than your grandmother ever was, God rest her. I laughed. For the first time in days, I actually laughed. I went home with him 8 days later, when our daughter was discharged from the NICU. My grandfather had already set up the spare room, with a second-hand bassinet he'd found at a Habitat for Humanity restore, cleaned it himself, bought new sheets from the Walmart on Dundas, set up a little lamp on the dresser so I'd have soft light for night feeds. He'd stocked the kitchen. He'd borrowed a car seat guide from the library and read the whole thing, and then shown me the printed diagram of how to angle it correctly. I moved into that spare room and I felt, for the first time since the accident, like I could breathe. My husband called every few days. We had short, polite conversations about logistics. hit paperwork, the car insurance claim, when I'd be ready to come back. He didn't ask much about our daughter. Not her feeding schedule, not her weight gain, not whether she was sleeping. Once, when I mentioned she'd finally latched properly and I was so relieved, there was a pause on the line, and then he said, "That's great, babe," and changed the subject. I started noticing things about that. How he always changed the subject when the conversation turned to her specifically. How his visits to my grandfather's house were short and slightly strained, like he was doing an obligation rather than wanting to see us. How he kept mentioning, with increasing frequency, something called the family trust. I hadn't thought much about money during the pregnancy. I had my own income. I worked in healthcare administration, a stable government position, and my husband earned well. We weren't struggling. But the trust was different. My grandfather had set it up years ago, after my grandmother passed. It was tied to property, specifically, the old family property in Prince Edward County, 140 acres that had been in the family since my great-great-grandparents. It wasn't worth much in the 80s. By now, with the land market what it was in Ontario, it was worth considerably more, several times more. I didn't know the details. My grandfather had never made a big deal of it. I knew it existed the way you know a lot of family things, vaguely, peripherally, without paying much attention. My husband had apparently been paying attention. The first clue was a conversation I overheard by accident. I was in the hallway outside my grandfather's kitchen, our daughter asleep against my chest in the carrier, coming to refill my water glass. My husband was in the kitchen. He didn't know I was there. He was on the phone. I caught fragments, a name I didn't recognize. Something about the timeline. Something about before it gets complicated. And then, very clearly, she doesn't know what it's worth. She's never asked. I stopped moving. If she signs, he said, it simplifies everything. The property's been in limbo since the old man. A pause. Right. But she'd have to agree to list it. I stood in the hallway for what felt like a very long time. Our daughter made a small sound against my chest and I pressed my hand to her back automatically. Keeping her still, keeping her quiet, I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed. I thought about everything I knew and everything I didn't, and then I picked up my phone and called my cousin. The one who'd called my grandfather, the one who always seemed to know things. I need to ask you something, I said. And I need you to be straight with me. She was quiet for a second. Okay, what do you know about my husband and the county property? Another silence, longer this time. How much do you know already? She asked. That told me everything. What she told me over the next hour was this. My husband had been in contact with a real estate developer, a firm based in Markham, for approximately 8 months. He had also been in contact with my parents. The developer wanted the land for a project. The project required a clean title and the agreement of all family members with any claim. My grandfather, as the primary owner, held the main interest. But my mother, as one of his children, had a secondary interest she'd never exercised. And my husband had apparently convinced my parents that if they could get me to encourage my grandfather to sell, or if I could be made to appear incompetent, overwhelmed, unable to advocate for myself, they might be able to have me sign away any future claim I might inherit. Your parents have already spoken to a lawyer, my cousin said, not a family lawyer, a property lawyer. I sat with that. And my husband. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought about my mother in the hospital chair, drinking her tea. I thought about my father calculating his exit route. I thought about my husband on the phone. She doesn't know what it's worth. I thought about my daughter, asleep in the next room. At my grandfather's house, in sheets he'd bought himself from the Walmart on Dundas. I went to my grandfather that evening. I told him all of it. I watched his face as I talked, and it did something I wasn't expecting. It settled. Not in a defeated way, but in a way that suggested he wasn't entirely surprised, like someone who'd been waiting for a particular weather system to arrive. I know about the developer, he said when I finished. He came to me directly about 6 months ago. I told him no. Did you know my husband was involved? He was quiet. I had a feeling, said. Wasn't coming entirely from strangers. He reached over and put his hand over mine. I want you to know something, he said. That property is not being sold. Not by me, and not after I'm gone if I have anything to say about it. It belongs to this family. It belonged to your grandmother. And whatever anyone has told you to sign. He looked at me steadily. You haven't signed anything, have you? No, I said. Nothing. He nodded slowly. Good. The next few weeks moved quickly, and also somehow very slowly. I called a lawyer. I found her through the Law Society of Ontario's referral service, a woman who specialized in family property law and had an office in Hamilton. I told her everything. She listened without expression, took careful notes, and at the end said, You haven't been compelled to sign anything. No one has been able to access the trust without your grandfather's consent, and your grandfather is mentally competent to make his own decisions. So technically, nothing illegal has happened yet. Yet, that word sat with me. But, she continued. What you're describing, the coordinated effort between your husband and your parents to pressure you during a period of physical vulnerability, is something a court would take seriously in a separation proceeding if it came to that. It came to that. I won't lie and say the decision to separate from my husband was easy or clean. We had built a life together. I had loved him. Part of me still, in some rearranged and complicated way, understood that he was someone who had gotten greedy and had made choices he couldn't take back. But that understanding didn't change what those choices were. It didn't change the hospital room. It didn't change she doesn't know what it's worth. We separated in May. He moved out of the house. We had a townhouse in Mississauga in both our names, and the division of that asset became part of the legal proceedings. My lawyer was thorough. His lawyer was expensive. It took time. My parents, my actual parents, the people who had raised me, called me once, in March, to tell me I was being unreasonable. My mother said I was letting my emotions drive decisions that would hurt me financially. My father said he hoped I understood that they'd only ever wanted what was best for the family. I asked him which family he meant. He didn't have an answer for that. I didn't cut them off completely. I don't think I'm built for that kind of clean break. But I stepped back. I stopped calling on Sundays. I stopped trying to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was and what I was worth. My grandfather, meanwhile, became my daughter's person. That's the only way I can describe it. She would light up when she heard his voice, even at 2 months, 3 months. That particular brightening that babies do when someone familiar comes near. He sang to her old songs I half remembered from childhood, and held her through the fussy evenings with a patience I think only people of his generation have, a kind of profound unhurriedness. He also, quietly and without making a production of it, updated his estate documents. He worked with his own lawyer, not the one my parents had consulted, obviously, and restructured things to make the trust clearer, the beneficiaries explicit, and the land status protected from any future pressure. He told me about it after it was done, over coffee at his kitchen table, in the same straightforward way he told me everything. I should have done it years ago, he said. I kept putting it off. You stop wanting to think about what comes after you're gone. I'm glad you did it, I said. So am I, he said. And then he topped up my coffee without being asked. Because that's what he does. The insurance settlement from the accident took months to finalize, as these things do. The other driver's insurance accepted liability. There was no dispute about fault. My lawyer helped me ensure the settlement appropriately reflected the timing, the accident, the premature birth, the NICU costs, my inability to work for the first 3 months post-delivery. It wasn't a windfall, but it was fair, and fair was what I needed. By summer, my daughter and I had moved into a rented place of our own, a small 2-bedroom apartment in Hamilton, closer to my lawyer's office than I'd intended, but it worked out. My cousin lives nearby. My grandfather makes the drive twice a month, always with something from the bakery on Queen Street. My daughter is 9 months old now. She has her father's nose and my stubbornness, which I think will serve her better than his did him. She sits up on her own and has strong opinions about her toys, and laughs at the dog that lives in the apartment below us, every single time she sees it, like it's the funniest thing she's ever encountered. I think about what I would have told myself 2 years ago. The woman who called 911 from a parking lot, because she already knew the people she loved wouldn't come. I would have told her, some of them won't, and that will hurt in ways you can't predict, in places you didn't know you had. But the one who shows up in his good coat, at 9 o'clock at night, with butter tarts from the bakery on Queen Street, he'll be enough. He'll be more than enough. I'm still learning to trust that. Some days are easier than others. But my daughter laughs at the dog downstairs, and my grandfather drives 45 minutes to bring us carrot cake. And the land in Prince Edward County is still ours. That's what I hold on to.